God's chosen on before heaven shifts everything. You must do this first. What if I told you the silence in your life isn't rejection, it's suspense? That heaven hasn't closed its doors, it's just holding its breath, waiting not on your next prayer, but on your obedience to the last whisper God gave you. You've cried, you've fasted, you've begged for answers in the middle of the night, but the miracle you're pleading for is still standing behind a door you refuse to open. This is not a moment for goosebumps. It's a holy interruption, a summons to stop asking and start moving. Because the truth is, you're not stuck. You're just one yes away from your shift. And if you are God's chosen one, this message was written in heaven with your name on it. The rain fell steady that night, tapping against the windows like a question. She sat alone in her small Texas kitchen, Bible open, journal untouched, heart heavy. Her name was Dana. Once, she'd heard God clearly, felt him like wind on her skin. But lately, silence. No whisper, no confirmation, no fresh word. Just stillness. She had fasted, prayed, tithed, posted scriptures on sticky notes, paced her living room like Jericho, hoping the walls of delay would finally fall. But nothing moved. Not heaven, not the promise, not the pain. And in the quiet, a dangerous thought crept in. Maybe God forgot me. But what if that silence wasn't abandonment? What if it was alignment, waiting on activation? What if the next chapter of her life wasn't waiting on God at all, but on her obedience to the last thing he said? In a town that moved slow and prayed hard, Dana was about to find out. God hadn't changed his mind. He was just waiting for her yes. Part 1. The sound of heaven is a whisper waiting on a step. The pews creaked under teenage Dana's weight as she sat curled into herself on the last row of Emmanuel Baptist Church. Outside, cicadas sang their evening hymns. Inside, only the hum of the ceiling fan and the ticking of the wall clock kept time with her restless thoughts. She didn't want to be there. The church smelt like old wood and worn Bibles, comforting to some, suffocating to her. At 16, Dana had already started questioning everything. Why was God so quiet when she needed him loud? Why did prayer feel like speaking into a well that never echoed back? She had begged for a sign, any sign, but the heavens were sealed and her heart tired. Pastor Isaiah was the only one who noticed her slipping. He didn't yell. He never did. He just walked slow, sat beside her and handed her a mint from his coat pocket. Then he whispered, "You know, God's voice isn't always loud, but it waits louder than your doubt." She blinked. He continued, "You want him to shout, but sometimes heaven's strategy is a whisper. Not because he's distant, but because he's waiting. And child, he's not waiting on your next prayer. He's waiting on your next step." Dana sat still. Those words sank like seeds into soil too tired to hope. Was it possible? That obedience wasn't just about doing big things for God, but about the little steps she was too afraid to take. "I'm not going to pretend it's easy," Isaiah said, eyes gentle. "But God doesn't go quiet when he's done with you. He goes quiet when you stopped walking where he last spoke." That night, Dana didn't run to the altar. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her hands. But for the first time in months, she stood up. And in that tiny, quiet act, her first true step, something shifted in the spirit. Part 2. The last instruction still echoes. A farmhouse porch at dawn, coffee in hand, journal open. The sky was still bruised with morning when Dana stepped barefoot onto the porch, coffee steaming in her chipped mug. The old swing creaked as she sat, pulling a fleece throw around her legs. The Texas sunrise wasn't rushed. It painted the fields slow and sacred. She opened her journal, page after page of prayers and plans, tear-stained dreams. highlights of verses she'd clung to like lifelines. And then, there it was. One line, circled, starred, underlined in red ink. Start the ministry. Her heart skipped. That phrase wasn't new. God had whispered it 12 years ago, in a woman's retreat, during quiet worship, when everything inside her burned with vision. She'd felt it in her marrow. Start the ministry. Create space for the broken. Teach the word. Lead with fire and tenderness. But life got busy, then complicated, then hard. Excuses disguised as wisdom had piled up. Wait for the right time. Get more credentials. Make sure it's safe. But now on this porch, 12 years later, the same whisper returned. Not new, not louder, just still there. Her grandmother used to say, God don't change the plan just 'cause you got scared. He waits on your yes, like a gentleman on the porch swing, patient but unmoved. Dana swallowed hard. The silence she blamed on God? Maybe it wasn't silence. Maybe it was an echo, the last instruction still waiting to be fulfilled. She closed the journal, pressed it to her chest, and exhaled. Maybe the next word from heaven wouldn't come, because the last one still sat unopened. Part 3. Emotion moves people. Obedience moves heaven. A Sunday worship service. The sanctuary lights dimmed as the worship team played their final chord. The room swelled with sound, voices crying out, hands raised high, tears falling freely. It was the kind of moment that made the air feel thick with glory. Dana was in the second row, arms lifted, mascara tracing soft rivers down her cheeks. She was weeping, loudly, deeply, honestly, the kind of cry that came from years of unanswered prayers. She wasn't putting on a show. She meant every word. God, I surrender. I need breakthrough. I need you to move. But even as her hands trembled in surrender, something in her spirit still felt like her prayers weren't making it past the ceiling. After service, her friend Melanie found her in the hallway near the coffee table. You okay? She asked gently, handing Dana a tissue. Dana nodded. Yeah, I just needed to release some stuff. Melanie tilted her head. That's good, but can I ask something? Dana hesitated. Sure. What's the last thing God told you to do? Dana froze. Melanie pressed softly. I mean, besides pray and worship, what did he ask of you that you still haven't done? The hallway suddenly felt colder. Dana's heart pounded, not in guilt, but in recognition, because she knew the answer. God had already spoken, years ago, months ago. But instead of acting, she had been performing spiritual CPR, hoping her emotion could revive what only obedience could unlock. And then Melanie said something that hit like thunder wrapped in grace. Tears may move your heart, but obedience is what moves his hand. Dana didn't say much after that. But that night, she didn't just cry in her room. She got on her knees and asked God what steps she needed to take next. Not what to feel, not what to pray, but what to do. Part 4. The obedience you delayed is the breakthrough you denied. Corporate office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Dana stared blankly at her monitor. Spreadsheets, reports, Zoom meetings, promotions, all the things she had once prayed for, now felt like weights chained to her spirit. She had climbed the ladder. Senior project manager, 6 figures, corner office. People called her blessed. But inside, something was breaking. Because years ago, before the job, before the applause, God had spoken. Leave the boat. Not out of rebellion, not out of burnout, but because he was calling her into deeper waters. Start the ministry. Launch the women's gatherings. Feed the hungry. Teach the word. Be a midwife to purpose. But she had smiled and nodded and said, "The Lord, let me just get this promotion first." Then it became just one more year. Then, when things are more stable, then maybe that wasn't really God. And now she was successful, but suffocating. Fruitful in the eyes of man, yet fallow in the eyes of heaven. That morning she got the biggest raise of her career, but instead of joy, she felt grief. And in the stillness of her office, the Holy Spirit whispered, "You're building on disobedience." Dinah froze, not out of fear, but clarity. She had confused God's patience for permission. She had mistaken delay for divine silence. But God hadn't changed his mind. She had just ignored his voice long enough to convince herself he hadn't spoken. The blessings weren't confirmation, they were mercy. Mercy that let her succeed, even while she stood outside of her assignment. Dana closed her laptop, walked into the bathroom, and cried in a stall like a child. Not because she lost something, but because she realized she had traded calling for comfort. Part 5. The mountain won't move until you do. The sun was just beginning to rise over the hills as Dana adjusted the straps on her backpack. The gravel crunched beneath her boots, and the trail stretched ahead like a challenge. She and her nephew, Micah, had set out early. His idea, not hers. "You need fresh air," he'd said, with all the authority of a 10-year-old prophet. But now, halfway up the winding path, Dinah lagged behind, sweating, sighing, silently battling a spiritual fatigue heavier than the incline. Micah darted ahead like a deer, laughing, fearless. She envied that kind of boldness. "Mon auntie!" he shouted from up the trail. "It gets better after this part." She looked up. A wall of jagged rock loomed before her, seemingly unmovable. And just like that, she felt it again. That ache. Not in her legs, but in her spirit. "God," she whispered, "how long do I have to wait for this mountain to move?" The wind didn't answer. No sign, no shift. Then Micah called back again. "All you gotta do is start climbing." And in that innocent shout, heaven echoed. The verse she'd memorized as a child surged to the surface. "If you say to this mountain, be moved, it will." But the Spirit corrected her gently. "The mountain won't move until you do." Dana blinked. It wasn't that God hadn't been listening. It's that she hadn't been walking. She kept praying for mountains to move, but she hadn't taken a single obedient step toward them. So she wiped her brow, gripped the edge of the rock, and began to climb, one trembling step after another. And as she did, the mountain didn't crumble, but her fear did. Part 6. Heaven is waiting on your walk, not your worry. Walker. The clock read 2:13 a.m. Outside, the cicadas had gone silent. Inside, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the antique wall clock Dana's grandmother left behind. The kind that chimed every half hour like it was keeping heaven's time. Dana sat on the edge of her couch, knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in a faded fleece blanket that still faintly smelled of lavender and prayer oil. She had done everything the church taught her. She had fasted for 7 days straight, nothing but water and whispers. She had played worship music for hours, hands lifted, tears falling in the dark. She had prayed psalms like warfare, declared scriptures over her house, over her bank account, over her barren future. And still, nothing had shifted. Bills were still due. The ministry was still just an idea scribbled in a decade-old notebook. And God's voice? Still silent. She was exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually. Her soul felt like a dried-up riverbed, cracked, thirsty, and still waiting for rain. "God," she whispered into the dimness of the room, her voice hoarse. "I'm doing everything I know to do. Why aren't you moving?" There was no thunderous answer, no angel at the window, just silence. She clutched her blanket tighter, rocking slightly, willing herself not to cry again. "Is it me?" she asked. "Is there something I haven't done?" The question she didn't want to ask rose from the ashes of her honesty. Am I the reason my life is stuck? The moment she voiced it, the room changed. Not physically, not audibly, but spiritually. The atmosphere shifted. She felt a weight settle over her. Not condemnation, but clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't shout, but pierces. A whisper passed through her spirit. I'm not waiting on you to weep. I'm waiting on you to walk. Dana froze. Suddenly her mind was flooded with the image of the 10 lepers in Luke 17. She'd read the story 100 times, but now it read her. Go show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were healed. Not before, not while they wept, not because they shouted louder than the others. As Dana sat up straight, the blanket falling from her shoulders. The word of God wasn't a theory, it was a pattern, and this pattern was clear. Movement unlocked miracles. The breakthrough she had begged for wasn't sitting in her future, it was waiting on her motion. Her worry had been loud, but her walk had been silent, and God, in His mercy, was not punishing her. He was preserving the blessing, waiting for obedience to protect her from premature manifestation. She reached for her Bible on the coffee table, hands trembling. It fell open to Isaiah 30:21. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it." Walk, not wait, she whispered aloud. Lord, what step have I been ignoring? It came quick, gentle, but undeniable. Cooler. Dana's stomach twisted. She knew who he meant. Renee, the woman she'd mentored 5 years ago, the one she felt betrayed by. They hadn't spoken since the fallout. God had told her to reconcile last year, but she had tucked it away under the phrase, "when I'm ready." But heaven wasn't waiting on her readiness. It was waiting on her obedience. She shook her head. That can't be the key. That can't be what's blocking everything. But her spirit already knew. It wasn't just about Renee. It was about surrender. It was about walking even when she didn't want to. Her phone sat on the coffee table, dark screen glowing with notifications she had no interest in. Her heart pounded in her ears as she reached for it. Opened contacts, strolled to Renee's name. She hesitated. Then she remembered something her grandmother used to say. When God says walk, even your delay is a decision. She hit call. Renee answered on the second ring. Dana? There was silence. Then tears. Then grace. What Dana didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Renee had been battling suicidal thoughts that night. Her family had fallen apart. Her heart was breaking, and she had whispered just hours before, God, if you're real, have somebody call me. Dana was that somebody. They talked for an hour. No fireworks. Just healing. Just steps. And when she hung up, something shifted. The atmosphere in her home felt lighter. The weight lifted. No money had dropped from the sky. No angel choir had erupted in her kitchen. But for the first time in months, Ada could breathe. It wasn't the conversation that broke the cycle. It was the obedience. She stood up, walked to the front door, and stepped outside into the cool night. The stars shimmered like whispers. The breeze felt like approval. And she heard it again, not audibly, but certainly. You're not behind, you just paused. And now, we move. Tears welled in her eyes, not from frustration this time, but from relief. Heaven wasn't angry. Heaven had just been waiting, not on her tears, not on her prayers, not even on her worship, but on her walk. She whispered one last thing before stepping back inside. Lord, I'm done stalling. I'm ready to walk, even if my feet still shake. And heaven whispered back, then watch what opens when you move. Part 7. God doesn't rewrite instructions for your comfort. The soft scent of lemongrass oil filled the small, warmly lit room. Books lined the shelves, everything from Proverbs to psychology. Framed scripture verses hung beside watercolor prints of lilies and open hands. Dana sat on the worn velvet couch, hands folded tightly in her lap. Miss Althea, her Christian counselor of 6 months, settled into the wing-back chair across from her. A retired pastor's wife with silver hair and prophetic eyes Althea had the rare gift of silence, that listened. Dana had cried during sessions before, had vented, raged, questioned God's silence. But today she was just tired. Tired of cycling, tired of waiting, tired of feeling like she was so close to something but never able to touch it. Miss Althea smiled gently. "Tell me where your spirit is today." Dana didn't respond right away. She stared at her lap, picked at the edge of her sleeve, then said softly, "I think I've been mistaking God's patience for permission." Miss Althea raised an eyebrow, interested. "Go on." Dana exhaled deeply. "I keep asking God for clarity, for signs, for confirmation, but deep down I already know what He told me to do." She paused. "I just haven't done it." Miss Althea nodded slowly. "And why not?" Dana's voice cracked. "Because it scares me, because it'll change everything, because I don't know if I'm strong enough to walk away from everything I've built." The room held that truth like holy ground. Then Althea said the sentence that would follow Dana for the rest of her life. "Dana, obedience isn't rewritten because it makes you uncomfortable. It's recalled until you surrender." Dana's eyes filled, not from offense, but because something in her spirit stood to attention. Althea continued, "You're not unclear. You're unwilling. There's a difference." Dana swallowed hard. "I just wanted to make sure I wasn't moving too fast, that it wasn't emotion," she said, her voice defensive but weary. Althea leaned forward, voice steady. "Do you know what delayed obedience looks like in the spirit realm?" Dana shook her head. "It looks like disobedience wearing makeup. Pretty, polished, well-resined, but still rebellion." That landed hard. Not as condemnation, but as rescue. Dana closed her eyes. She thought about how many times she'd said, "I'm praying on it. I'm waiting for peace. I just need more clarity." But what if peace wasn't the prerequisite for obedience? What if it was the result of it? She remembered the verse from Philippians. "The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts." And suddenly she saw it. Peace wasn't supposed to lead her. Peace was supposed to meet her on the path of surrender. She opened her eyes. "Miss Althea, what if I fail?" Althea smiled. "Sweetheart, failure isn't found in walking the wrong path. It's in refusing to move when God already mapped the right one." Dana chuckled through tears. "I guess I've been overthinking it." "Of course you have. You're human. But overanalysis is just fear in a tuxedo. It looks sharp, but it never dances." That made Dana laugh. Althea softened her tone. "Let me ask you something sacred. So what did God tell you to do that you're still trying to negotiate?" Dana didn't need time to think. She knew. Leave the job. She swallowed. And start the mentorship program. For women like me. Women who've known church, but never known healing. Althea didn't respond right away. She reached into her drawer, pulled out a small card with a handwritten verse on it and passed it across the table. Dana read it. "If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land." Isaiah 1:19. Then, in soft but serious tone, Althea added, "God does not bless avoidance, He anoints alignment." Dana looked down at the verse. Her hands trembled slightly. She whispered, "I thought I needed more faith." "You don't need more faith," Althea replied. "You need more follow through." Those words sliced through every layer of indecision Dana had wrapped herself in like a blanket. She had confused divine delay with divine denial. But the truth was, heaven had spoken. The instructions hadn't expired. They'd just been ignored. Althea continued. The same God who told Noah to build an ark didn't come back and say, "Never mind." The same God who told Abraham to leave his father's house didn't say, "Wait until you're 100% sure." And the same God who told you to leave that job hasn't changed his mind just because you got scared. Dana's tears slipped freely now. Althea stood up, walked over, and gently took her hands. She prayed softly, "Lord, give her the courage to obey you, without conditions. Let her stop waiting for peace that only comes from obedience. Let her legs move before her mind catches up. And let her see that delayed obedience is not a safe delay. It's a silent detour." As the prayer ended, Dana felt something lift. Like shackles she hadn't realized she'd still been wearing. Not shame, but strategy. She didn't need to do it all today, but she needed to do the next step. And not tomorrow, not when the timing was perfect. Today. As she left the office, Miss Althea called after her, "One last thing, Dana." She turned. Althea smiled. God doesn't repeat himself because he's unsure. He repeats himself because he's unwavering. Dana didn't answer. She just smiled back, because something had clicked. God wasn't rewriting the instruction to fit her comfort. He was recalling it to unlock her calling, and she was finally ready to answer. Part 8. Delayed Obedience in Disguise. Part 8. Delayed Obedience in Disguise. ETH and disguise. Delayed obedience in disguise. Adjust, obede. This is... The room was too quiet, too familiar, too dangerous. Dana sat at the edge of her ex-partner's leather sofa, trying to pretend the hollow ache in her chest was just nostalgia and not conviction. The night had started innocently enough. A check-in text. I just wanted to see how you're doing. An invitation for coffee that turned into dinner that turned into this. This space. This silence. This place she swore she'd never sit in again. He hadn't changed, not really. Same smile, same charm, same emotionally vacant stare beneath polished surface talk. But something had changed in her. She wasn't the same Dana who used to shrink into silence, who used to make excuses for his avoidance, who used to measure love by how much pain she could endure and still stay soft. No, this Dana knew better. And yet she was still here, on this couch, in this familiar trap. She didn't hear an audible voice, but she didn't need to. The moment she stepped into his apartment, the Holy Spirit had whispered with crystal clarity, "Don't go back." But she had. She had felt the nudge at every turn. When she put on the makeup, when she drove to the restaurant, when she hesitated before getting out of the car. Each moment was a chance to obey. Each moment was a doorway out. But she kept walking deeper in. Now, here she sat, crossing her legs, forcing small talk, avoiding eye contact with conviction itself. He turned on music, something smooth and nostalgic. He lit a candle, vanilla, her favorite. And just like that, the spiritual tension rose like smoke curling under the door. Dana's eyes scanned the room, and in her spirit, a sobering truth formed. This isn't romance, it's rebellion wrapped in roses. The enemy doesn't always show up in horns and heat. Sometimes he shows up in habits, in the almosts, in the familiar, in the open doors God already closed. But we keep trying to reopen out of loneliness and delay. And Dana knew it. Her breakthrough hadn't stalled because of lack. It had stalled because of this very decision, this repeated pattern. Every time she got close to walking into her calling, this man reappeared. And every time she delayed her destiny under the disguise of closure or unfinished conversations. But God had already spoken, clearly, and months ago. Let him go. Dana felt her throat tighten. She stood suddenly. He looked confused. Everything okay? She nodded slowly, eyes glassy. I have to go. Now? She nodded again. Yeah. He tilted his head, trying to read her. Did I do something? No, she whispered. I did. I disobeyed. He laughed awkwardly. What? She didn't explain. She didn't owe him theology. She just grabbed her purse, walked toward the door, and paused before opening it. Then, almost as a confession to the air between them, she said, "Delayed obedience isn't discernment, it's disobedience in disguise." And with that, she stepped out into the night. The cold air hit her like mercy. For the first time in months, her steps felt like worship. Like every inch away from him was an inch back into her assignment. She drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts. Just the presence of God settling on her like rain after drought. And as she pulled into her driveway, tears fell, not from heartbreak, but from relief. Because finally, she was no longer asking God for a new word. She was obeying the one he gave her long ago. And heaven, so long silent, felt near again. In her living room, she lit a candle of her own. Not vanilla. Something earthy, rooted. She sat with her Bible, heart still raw, but her spirit steady. She heard nothing out loud, but deep inside her spirit echoed. Now we can build, because God doesn't build on delay. He builds on surrender. Part 9. The seed of yes unlocks the rain of heaven. The grocery store parking lot buzzed with the usual Sunday afternoon chaos. Carts rattled. Children cried. Someone blared country music from a pickup truck with one missing taillight. Dana slid her debit card back into her wallet and wheeled her groceries to the car. It had been a quiet, steady week. No dramatic revelations. No angel visitations. Just small steps. She had started clearing out her old office. Resigned from the job, with no backup plan. Set up her LLC. Typed the first outline of the mentorship program curriculum God had placed on her heart. But even with all the movement, she still felt vulnerable, exposed. Like every yes she had offered, God was a seed buried in unseen soil, and nothing had sprouted. Yep. She opened her trunk and began unloading. That's when she noticed her. A woman, late 40s, maybe 50, tired eyes, with 2 kids in tow, 1 bag of groceries, a declined card. The cashier had handled it with compassion, but Dana could tell this woman was humiliated. She thanked the cashier, pulled her kids away, and walked to a rusty van parked near the edge of the lot. Dana froze. She didn't hear anything, not audibly, but her spirit burned with a familiar pull. Go pay for her groceries. Dana looked back toward the entrance. But Lord, I already paid for mine. Again quiet, but clear. Pay for hers. Dana sighed, looked at the time. She had frozen meat in the trunk, and only $230.00 left in her checking account until the next deposit. And still the whisper returned. Not forceful, but holy. This is the kind of seed I multiply. Dana turned, pushed her cart back into the store, walked up to the register and asked the cashier quietly, "Do you remember that woman who just left with 2 kids?" The young man nodded. "Yeah, real sweet." Got embarrassed though. "Can I pay for her groceries?" He blinked. "Like?" "No." She nodded. He shrugged. "Sure." "That's really kind." Dana paid the $73.48. As she wheeled her cart back toward her car, she saw the woman again. Still sitting in the van, face buried in her hands, kids quietly snacking on something from their pockets. Dana tapped on the driver's side window. The woman looked up, startled. Dana smiled gently and held up the grocery bags. "Ah," Dana smiled gently and held up the grocery bags. "Dad," the woman blinked, confused. "You what?" "I paid for your groceries. They're yours." Tears came fast. Shock, gratitude, humility. She opened the door, stood, and grabbed Dana's hands. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this?" Dana didn't say, "Because I'm a good person." She didn't say, "Just felt like it." She said, "Because God told me to. And He sees you." The woman crumbled into sobs, whispering thank you over and over again. Dana hugged her, prayed with her right there in the parking lot. And when it was over, they both walked back to their cars, lighter. As Dana climbed back into her driver's seat, she felt it. The shift. Not in the sky, not in her bank account, but in her soul. Quiet joy, a holy alignment. A peace that came not from a transaction, but from a yes. She remembered what she once read. Who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. Proverbs 11:25. Her obedience wasn't grand. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exact. And that made it powerful. She looked up at the sky, the clouds breaking, sun peeking through, and in her spirit she heard the Father's smile. That yes just watered your field. Dana smiled, not because she saw fruit yet, but because she knew, finally, she had become good soil. Part 10. One yes can shift everything. The front porch hadn't changed. Same creaky swing, same chipped mug, steam rising. Same faded Bible with worn pages turned by years of storms, questions and hopes. But Dana had changed. She sat in the early stillness of a Monday morning, wrapped in the same fleece blanket she'd worn during countless wrestling nights. But now, there was no more wrestling. There was resolve. In front of her sat her old leather journal, the one filled with promises, prophecies, scribbled prayers, and never started plans. She hadn't touched it in weeks. Not since the night she finally made the call. Not since the obedience journey began. But today, something sacred was calling her back to the page. With slow reverence she opened it. Her eyes landed immediately on a line circled in red. Start the ministry. She stared at it. How many times had she read that line, cried over it, prayed about it, but never actually obeyed it? But this time she didn't sigh. She picked up a pen, and underneath the original instruction she wrote, I did. 3 letters. But they thundered in the heavenlies. I did. She hadn't launched the website yet. He hadn't posted anything big. But she had called the first woman, held her first small group Zoom, started designing the mentorship curriculum, and that was enough. Because obedience isn't measured by scale, it's measured by surrender. As she sat in that quiet, birds beginning to chirp, something washed over her. It wasn't adrenaline, it wasn't pride, it was peace. The kind that only comes when your heart is finally in alignment with heaven's rhythm. Dana exhaled deeply. For years, she had believed that the next chapter of her life required strategy, a network, the right opportunity, or a fresh word from God. But it had always required one thing, a single yes. She looked out over the front lawn, dew glistening like diamonds on the grass. And she whispered it again, not because she had to, but because her soul needed to. Yes, Lord. And this time, there was no hesitation, no fear, no bargaining, just yes. In that moment, she remembered what the Spirit had whispered in the grocery store parking lot. Yes, just watered your field. It was true, because even though the visible harvest hadn't come yet, something had shifted. Her sleep was sweeter, her thoughts clearer, her prayers deeper. Doors hadn't swung wide open yet, but her spirit had. And maybe that's what God had been waiting on all along. Not her perfection, not her performance, just her posture, her yes, a small trembling seed, now starting to crack open under the rain of God's pleasure. She closed the journal and stood. She walked to the edge of the porch and lifted her eyes to the horizon. And though she couldn't see them yet, she knew the harvest was coming, because one yes, just one surrendered, quiet, trembling yes, had shifted everything. The shift happens at yes. Let's go back to where we began. You thought heaven was ignoring you, that God had gone quiet, that your prayers were sitting unopened in the inbox of eternity. But now you know the truth. You were never stuck. You were just paused, and heaven was holding its breath, waiting for your obedience. Because the silence wasn't punishment, it was preservation. God wasn't withholding the blessing. He was waiting for you to become the kind of soil that could carry it. And this story, Dana's story, might be yours. You've asked for clarity, but deep down, you already know the instruction. Forgive them, delete the number, apply for the position, say goodbye to comfort, pick up the dream again, call your mother, write the first chapter, sow the uncomfortable seed. Take the walk you've been delaying, because somewhere in your spirit God already spoke. And now, heaven is leaning over your life, not with judgment, but with mercy. Not waiting on more emotion, just movement. Let this be the moment where the pattern breaks. Let this be the line in the sand, the day the delay ended, and your destiny resumed. Because when you give God your movement, He releases His miracles. Obedience isn't about being perfect. It's about being postured. It's not about understanding every step. It's about trusting the one who directs them. God doesn't ask for noise. He asks for surrender. And today, if your heart is still beating, then heaven is still ready. The assignment is still active. The oil is still flowing. The invitation is still open. If this word pierced your spirit, don't just feel it, follow it. In the comments below, I want you to finish this sentence. Today, I choose to obey God by... Be specific, be honest. Let your words be your first step. Type it now, because obedience delayed is blessing deferred. And if this message stirred something in you, share it. Send it to someone you know is waiting on a miracle but has been stuck in delay. Because together, we're not just believing for breakthrough, we're walking into it. The yes is yours, the power is His, and together it will change everything.